Should you pay off debt?
Or should you invest?
That's what we're going to be talking about today, so stick around.
Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast, where we teach clients how to build wealth and create passive income without the risk of Wall Street.
Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso, and what we're going to be talking about today is whether you should be paying off debt or whether you should be investing. But first, let's give somebody a thank you. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Yeah. Anthony, who do you got in mind?
There's a guy, Jacob, who's been commenting on the podcast and the YouTube, and so we just want to appreciate for him subscribing, and I've been digging his comments.
Anthony's been digging your comments, but I can't say that I've appreciated them. But Jacob, we do appreciate you subscribing to the channel and engaging with us, so thank you very much. And now let's dive into it. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Anthony, how many times have you been asked, hey, I've got a chunk of money. Should I be sick? Should I pay off debt? Or should I be investing?
All the time. In fact, I got an email just the other day, a client asking the same question. She wanted to buy an asset, but then she just did her taxes and has a big tax bill. And she's like, okay, what should I do? And I'm like, you know what? You should like and subscribe our podcast because that's exactly where we're going to be recording.
You gave her a cliffhanger. You didn't answer a question.
No, I did.
It'll come out in 2 weeks. Hang around.
I had explained it to her, and I won't give you the answer yet, but maybe what we're going to do today is, there's pros and cons to doing everything. There's not always one right answer. So today what we're going to do is talk about the pros and cons of paying down debt, the pros and cons of investing.
Yeah, let's go through this kind of logically and critically and highlight some of these things for us. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Awesome.
Now, Cameron, let's talk about the pros of paying down debt.
Okay.
What are some of the pros of paying down debt?
Some of the pros to paying down debt is, number one, I would say that it's easy.
Now, what do you mean? What do you mean by easy?
Well, there's not much to think about, right? You already technically spent the money on what you wanted to purchase.
Good point.
So now you're just paying for it, right? So, hey, listen, okay, now you got to pay for it. So it's really easy to do, right? It's just kind of wiping that thing off.
Yeah.
The second part to that is that you're actually creating or clearing up some cash flow.
Right, yeah.
Right?
That cash flow that was going to pay that debt no longer is required.
Mm-hmm.
So in theory, we have some extra cash flow.
Yeah. And an intangible, right, that kind of comes to mind is often when you talk to people about debt is that the word that's kind of comes up when I've discussed in the past is it's suffocating, right? If somebody's got debt, man, it can just sit there on your chest and it can become suffocating. And so one of the pros of paying that thing off is that, you're kind of alleviating that stress. You're taking the monkey off your back, if you will.
Yeah, and I'll add a little story. We had a client that had some debt, and we were kind of looking at should he pay it off or not. And we actually had him pay off a debt that had zero interest. And again, and you brought up a good point. We're not just looking at the numbers on a spreadsheet. We're kind of looking at some of the intangibles, kind of the emotional side, and he had gotten a divorce, right? And they got an interest-free credit card to buy a mattress. Okay. The ex-wife got the mattress. So if we're looking at it, so when he makes that payment, he's not thinking, oh, this is 0% interest, man. This is a good use of my money. He's thinking, my ex is sleeping on this bed with another man.
Oh, jeez.
So we're like, you know what? There's no need for you to incur that stress every month, so you can save a little bit of interest. So we had him pay it off.
Incur that stress, or just to mentally revisit that, right? Just
visualize, yeah.
Write it, get it off. Yeah, absolutely. I will say this is that looking back, kind of over the career, and I've said this before, a lot of financial planning and this stuff really comes down to counseling. And man, when you do help somebody kind of pay off some debt, right? There is a big stress relief, and you get some pretty cool emotional responses, right? People enjoy kind of helping somebody walk through that with them. So Great little point there. And last thing that we kind of were able to come up with, right, is the fact that, if you're carrying debt, you are paying interest to somebody else. You pay that off, and now you kind of cancel out that payment to a third party, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Anthony, what are some cons?
So some of the cons and what we found when people pay off debt is that more too often people save money. Maybe they're not paying that. Maybe they freed up, a couple $100s, but they end up just spending it. They just ends up absorbing in lifestyle, and maybe they go out to dinner more, or they go out, or what'll also happen. Another con is they end up replacing it. Well, hey, I just paid off this car or this debt. Now I got an extra $500, and my car is breaking down. Let me go buy another car, or they're going to go buy another liability and just get back into the same situation. And to me personally, one of the biggest cons of paying down debt is the lack of access to cash. It's still liquid. If you pay that debt off, that's going to feel great, and there's a lot of advantages to it. But what if you need that money? Whether it's for maybe an emergency or an opportunity, you're not going to be able to get that back. So you want to make sure that we have some liquidity, we have that opportunity fund available before we start paying down debt.
You said something in there that I want to kind of bring up again. I thought you made a good point, surprisingly.
Just one?
Just one. First one ever. Episode 150-ish. I don't know. But the point we said is that people get comfortable, right? And I think that's exactly true, right? You think about what people do with cars, right? As they go and they buy a car and then dig themselves out of that hole, the first thing they do after they pay it off is they go buy another one. Very similar with other types of debt. And it's almost that people get comfortable kind of being in that position. And so, Anthony and I know you're a big mindset guy, right, as far as, hey, what's your approach to this? And I would say that having somebody to talk to about money or listening to other people and the way that they approach finances is really helpful in that regard, is that people do get in a comfort zone. And so I just thought that was a good point you made.
Well, let me add on to your good point of my great point. Because I was looking at the paper the other day. Yes, I do get the paper. And they had the new Bronco Raptor edition. And that looked cool. And I look at the price. I'm like, you know what? That's just a little bit more than the last car I bought. So then I'm like, well, wait a minute. I kind of snapped out of it. But it got me to think is that we do get comfortable, and we're like, hey, I'm used to spending this amount for a car or for a house or a vacation, and then it's just always easier to spend more. And when we're buying liabilities, we have to be very careful of continuing to buy more. Another good point.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I gotta say this, right? Is that right? I vividly remember having this conversation several years ago with the young couple that I was talking to. Right. And man, they were great. They were on track. We're doing all this stuff. And then one day they kind of came in out of the blue, and they wanted to meet. And the husband wanted to go buy like a $70,000 truck. And I'm like, man, they were like mid-20s at the time. And they had good income and stuff, and they could afford it. But I remember saying to him, like, if you buy a $70,000 car at 25 years old, what's the next car going to be?
Yeah.
Like, you're never going to come down, right, from a $70,000 truck to a $30,000 truck. And I was just sitting there in my head, I'm thinking, man, I don't even buy $70,000 cars a night, right? And anyways, it was just a good point, and that was kind of how I presented it to him. And, I think we kicked the can down the road for a few years there. But
well, and I also say that's one thing parents need to be aware of. A lot of parents might be buying their child a car.
Yeah.
Just remember that whatever level you buy, your son or daughter a car at, when they go to buy the car themselves, they're not going to step down, right? They're only going to step up. And this whole concept has a name for it. Parkinson's law. And if you've read Becoming Your Own Banker, you should be very familiar with it. And what he talked about, and Nelson talked about in Becoming Your Own Banker, is a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity.
So true.
Mm-hmm.
So true. Let's recap real quick. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So what we're just talking about, we're talking about debt, and we went through the pros. First pro was, hey, paying off debt, it's going to be really easy. It's going to clear up some cash flow. It's going to alleviate stress for us, and we're going to eliminate interest that we're going to pay to other people. And then if you look at some of the cons, granted, I would say that, paying off debt at any point is never a bad thing, right? If that's a double negative there, it's always good, right? But if we were to come up with some negatives, is that cash will be absorbed into lifestyle, right? That cash flow that you paid off. Typically what happens is if you're not intentional with it, it does get replaced with new debt. And like Anthony surprisingly made a good point, that it's illiquid, right? Is you cannot access that cash once again if you need to or want to at a later date. So now let's move on.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Let's take a look at investing, Anthony. I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Do it.
Right? So if we've got a windfall, we've got some cash, we just looked at paying off debt, but now let's transition. Let's look at investing. What are some pros to taking our cash and investing?
I would say one of the biggest pros is we're starting to create some passive income, right? And for a lot of people, it might be their first investments who's actually producing passive income. And I could tell you, when you get that first check, like, it's addictive, because you're used to exchanging your time for money. And now you just have your dollars out there working, and you're getting that money coming in, and you didn't have any effort to it. So we want to get started. We got to start somewhere. So creating that passive income, because with a lot of our clients, their goal is to create more passive income than their monthly expenses. So we got to start creating some passive income. I'd also say that we can also start increasing our wealth. Right, I know.
What do you mean by that? Increasing wealth? I'm not sure I'm following you.
Well, like, let's say, for example, I know we use a lot about real estate. Okay, so if you buy a rental property, that's producing cash flow. Okay, but also remember, your tenant is paying your mortgage. And now, typically, what we recommend is using a policy loan for the down payment, and then getting as much money for other people's money as possible, particularly if we can get a 30-year fixed. So each time the tenant's making that rental payment, it's going towards the mortgage, and some of it is going to principal. So we're building equity or increasing our wealth each month. Also, one of the advantages of real estate is the appreciation. So your wealth is increasing with the value of the home and the equity in the home from just paying down debt.
Good point.
Another good point is
it's 2 in 1 show. It's amazing. It's a miracle.
Right. Everybody here is talking about inflation, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing it at the pump. The housing market's going up. Used and new cars are going up. Everything's going up. Now, when we buy an asset, particularly if we buy a good asset, that should go up with inflation. And again, if we're talking about a rental property, the cost of the homes should be going up with inflation, but also so should your rent. And if you start looking at some of these news articles, now the housing market had shot up over the last couple of years. The rental market is now finally catching up. So when inflation hits or continues to hit, you will be able to charge more rent. And if you're getting a 30-year fixed, your mortgage stays the same while your income is going up. And also, as I'd mentioned, one of the cons of paying down debt is that loss of liquidity. Now, it's the exact opposite when we buy an asset. Because if something happens, whether, again, it's like a family emergency where we lost a job, or maybe something good, or maybe a even better opportunity came across, we can always sell that asset, or maybe even ideally borrow against it and continue to invest in a better opportunity.
Great point. I just had this conversation earlier today, right? And this was talking about someone that went and took their cash and went out and bought some gold and silver, right, just recently. And the conversation was, man, it just seems weird, right? I'm trying to remind myself that I didn't spend my cash. I just moved it from one cash account over into a different asset. So good point there.
It's 2. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's price.
So, we're always very clear. There's pros and cons to everything, and there's some cons to investing. So, Cam, why don't you drop some wisdom on some cons of investing?
Yeah. Some cons to investing. One is there's some education that needs to be absorbed prior to investing, right? And we always talk about there's a level of due diligence and education that you have to do before you go make some sort of purchase of an asset. And so the con here would be that you do have to think, right? When we talked about paying off debt, it's easy just to write a check, send it off to the creditor, and be done with it. But in this instance, we need to go out there. We got to find what kind of asset class that we want to move into. We got to go and figure out exactly what we need to invest, how much money, our expected returns, and those things. So we do need to have some prep and some education that comes along with that. The second one would be that if we're investing, we're still carrying
the debt
that we had from before, right? It's still there, right? So depending on somebody's kind of emotional attachment to debt or however they approach it, is that, man, you know what? That could still be a pressure, right? We still could have that stress, that monkey on our back that we talked about before. And, right, last thing that I would say here is that if you're doing that, you do have an increased risk, right? If you take your cash and you don't pay down the debt, but you actually move into an investment or an asset here, man, what if it doesn't turn out? Right? A lot of times, right, when we do investing is there's due diligence, right? We're putting the time and effort into educating ourselves. And you know what? Maybe it doesn't hit that exact expected return that we're supposed to hit. Maybe it takes a little bit longer. But man, God forbid, right? What if we actually lost it? Right? Now there is that risk, right? If we're talking about rentals or something like that, maybe it's a vacancy risk for a couple of months, or a water heater goes out where there's just a capital expenditure for a short period of time. But that is an additional risk that we do need to take into consideration.
Perfect.
Yeah. Man, I think we touched on them all.
So that was the pros and cons. Now let's maybe share like our individual opinion. What's your take?
Me first?
Yeah.
Today what we're discussing is it's all or nothing, right? And to be truth, that's not reality, right? If you look back at kind of typically how I've handled it in most situations, it's a little bit of both, right? Is number one, if somebody comes into a windfall, we need to look at some of the intangibles. Hey, do we have our opportunity fund that's fully stocked and loaded and ready to go? Great. Well, then maybe we can look at doing something else, whether it's paying off debt or those things. And a lot of times we are going to do a little bit of both, right? Is usually what ends up happening. We pay off a little bit of debt, clears up some monthly cash flow. We need to be intentional with that. We need to redirect that back into cash savings. And then if we're looking at opportunities, hey, man, let's take some of that cash too, and maybe we pay for an education. We pay for a course. We pay for a class, something like that. And so that would be my take. Everything I would say is I would be more inclined, if I needed to pick one right here, I'm more inclined for accumulation and growth, and man, go find some assets. And you can't save your way to wealth. You've got to build. You've got to accumulate. And so, that would be where I'd be inclined to go. Your 2 cents, Anthony.
What I always said, particularly about mortgages, because there's always that question: should I pay off my mortgage or not? And my answer is, it's never a bad idea to pay off a debt. However, rarely is it the best idea, right? And I say that for a few reasons. For particularly right now, everybody's feeling this inflation. Now, as your debt, let's say your debt is $1,000. Well, 5 years from now, $1,000 is not going to be what it is today. Also, your debt naturally is going to be paid off. There's going to be a term that it will be paid up. So you're not going to have to worry about that debt forever. And when that debt's paid off, then that cash flow is going to then we can add it and start putting it to work. And also, here's something I think is cool: is if we can buy an asset that produces cash flow, couldn't we use that cash flow to pay the debt?
Absolutely.
And then now we got like your one of your favorite TV shows, the Hannah Montana. We got the best of both worlds, right? We're buying the asset and we are paying it down.
Nice. I like how you worked that in there. That's impressive.
Well, honestly, I haven't really had a dig on you in a while, and so this just came to me naturally, so I threw it in there.
Nice. Well done, Anthony. Good points, and some of them you stole from me, but regardless, well done.
What I would like to hear is this is our opinion, and I'm sure Cameron missed a couple. So if you could reply to us, or maybe you're watching us on YouTube, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, what some of your pros or cons are. And like Jacob, make some comments on how good Cameron's hair looks.
Jacob, you could probably save those comments. Yeah, save those for yourself. Awesome. Enjoy this episode.
Make it a fantastic day.
Take care.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode. Also, check out our website, infinitewealthconsultants.com, to find our podcast along with other additional resources.